Hey guys, we're going to dive into the properties of water finally and get into some of the details from the properties of water that you've already completed, but I want to go over it with you, of course. Just a friendly reminder to make sure you're taking notes in your written notebook just like you would be in class. You should have your cell phone, any other distracting devices away. Don't forget you can pause and rewind whenever necessary, and probably the most important part, you can stop and make questions, write questions that you have for me, send them to me during class time or via Canvas. All right, this lesson began with you going through an article and first of all taking a look at a graphic of water. All right, so we're going to go ahead and draw water. It's very important that you have a good idea of what the molecular structure of water looks like. So to start with, we're going to take a look at the overall structure of water. So the formula for water, as you all know, is H2O. So we got two hydrogens and one oxygen. So we're looking something like this. We have our two hydrogens. Then we have some type of a bond that's going to connect those two hydrogens to the oxygen. All right, I'm going to use blue to represent this bond. And I'm going to go ahead and draw two water molecules. So you're going to see that we're also going to have some type of a bond that is going to connect separate water molecules. Okay, so you can see here that I've got two separate molecules. Oops, sorry, wrong color there. Again, we've got two separate water molecules. So the first thing, one of the first things we're going to need to understand is the bonding of water. Okay, so we're going to make a note of that, the bonding of water. And there are going to be two types of bonds that we will be focused on. The first type of bond will be a covalent bond. All right, and this is going to be the bond actually within the water molecule. So this covalent bond connects the partially positive hydrogen atoms to the partially negative oxygen atom. All right, now this is really important. So in terms of what you really need to grasp as we get this water stuff going, this is very important that you understand that we have a hydrogen or two hydrogens that are partially positive and one oxygen that is partially negative. Okay, those charges are very important to understanding why these water molecules do what they do. Okay, the symbol for partial is this, so we're going to say this stands for partially positive, and then this would stand for partially negative. All right, so we're going to take a look at our hydrogen here, and we're going to say that this hydrogen is partially positive, this hydrogen is partially positive, this oxygen is partially negative, and this is what's going to give it its triangular shape. Okay, and again, these bonds right here within the water molecule itself, that's important, within the water molecule itself are covalent bonds. All right, we're going to be talking in a little bit about what makes covalent bonds so important, but in this case these bonds are not only covalent but they are polar. All right, and I want to briefly go ahead and define what the word polar means, and it is just an uneven distribution of charge, all right, across a molecule. So for example, the water molecule here has an uneven distribution of charge because our hydrogens are partially positive and the oxygen is partially negative. All right, so lastly here, let's take a look at the actual definition of a covalent bond, and we're going to consider a covalent bond. It's a molecular bond, which means that it's helping to hold a molecule together, in this case the water molecule, right, H2O. So we've got a sharing of electron pairs between atoms. So in this case we're sharing electron pairs between the hydrogen and the oxygen. That is a covalent bond. So that is our first type of bond. Our second type of bond, so this type of bond, otherwise known as an H bond, is actually an intermolecular bond, meaning that it occurs between separate molecules. All right, so intermolecular bond that takes place between separate molecules. All right, and in this case, it's going to be the bond that attaches separate water molecules. Make sure that you have down that important fact, because as we take a look back up at our drawing here, you see I've got two separate water molecules. We'll call this water molecule number 1 and water molecule number 2. Now we're going to take a look at our next type of bond, the H bond, right of the hydrogen bond. So we look first of all, and we have these blue bonds are going to be our polar covalent bonds. Okay. And then the bond that's going to hold together these two separate water molecules, we're going to have a hydrogen bond. And that's what I'm going to represent right there in purple, is the H bond. And that's what holds separate water molecules together. We've already mentioned our big idea for this entire unit is hydrogen bonding. Really, you can look at any question that you're going to have about the properties of water, which is what we're about to look at, and you can answer that question via the concept of hydrogen bonding, because it is those specific intermolecular forces that are caused by hydrogen that hold those water molecules together, that give water its unique properties. All right. As we went on with the do now, as you were looking at this article, one of the things we were looking at is basically an overview of why water is so important to life. There really are a bunch of reasons why water is so important to life. And one of the first ones that we're going to look at is how water is able to support life by carrying nutrients. All right, and some of those basic nutrients that water has to carry, we'll go ahead and list those, are going to be things like nitrogen, kind of like the electrolytes that you find in things like Gatorade, nitrogen and phosphorus and glucose. These are all going to be transported around a plant and around an animal, all right, basically because of water, because it's able to dissolve these things. If you have not done so already, go ahead and make sure you watch this informative crash course video. And we're going to take a look here now at the difference between a polar substance and a nonpolar substance. Alright, so to start with, after watching the crash course video, go ahead and hit pause, and let's get down an example of a polar substance and an example of a nonpolar substance. So probably our biggest example of a polar substance is going to be water. And if we refer back to our definition of polar, remember it is an uneven distribution of charge. So we have our uneven distribution of charge between the partially positive hydrogen atoms and the partially negative oxygen atoms. That's what's giving it its pole, just like the Earth has a north pole and a south pole, right? Those two poles kind of pull away from each other, and that gives the Earth a lot of its special properties, right? For nonpolar substances, we're looking at basically anything that will not dissolve in water. All right, so you should have an example down, for example, like maybe butters or oils, things like that. If you take some olive oil and put it into a pot of water, you're not going to be able to completely dissolve it. It'll mix in a little bit, but you won't be able to completely dissolve it. Another example of a polar substance would be something like table salt. Very simply, it is NaCl, right, where that Na or sodium is positive, the chlorine is negative. That is polar, right? We have an uneven distribution of charge. They kind of pull at each other, and it's that polar property that gives these polar substances such important characteristics. And this is what is really setting up the idea that water is a requirement for life on Earth. All right. If we take a look at the chemical makeup of a polar substance, it's going to be asymmetrical, and this should make sense if you think back to what we just drew, right? We just drew a water molecule. It kind of looked like this, so it's in an asymmetrical conformation. And then oils are going to be kind of like long chains. You can see some bends here and there, but for the most part they are long chains. So again, differences between polar and nonpolar substances, they do interact with each other. The fact that water is polar is very important to life on Earth because of that uneven distribution of charge. And then for nonpolar substances, we're looking at things like butters and oil. So we're going to go through this short video clip together, and then we're going to build back into our notes as we go through this. So pay close attention here. I'll be pausing and kind of screen clipping some things out and re-explaining them as we go. But now we're taking the idea that water is polar, that the hydrogen bonding between separate molecules of water is the driving force of all of these properties of water. And now we're going to see how important water is to life on Earth from a chemical standpoint. Your entire life, you've always known that water was important, right? You got to drink water every day. But now we're going to look specifically at the chemistry behind water and what makes it so important.
Life, as we know it, would not exist without water. Over 70% of the planet is covered in water, and our bodies are around 70% water. But why is water so important? The structure of a water molecule and the fact that it is capable of forming hydrogen bonds with multiple other water molecules simultaneously provides water molecules with some very unique characteristics. These include the ability to act as a universal solvent, the properties of cohesion and adhesion, a high surface tension, a high heat capacity, and changes in density based on temperature.
So take a moment now and go ahead and list all of these 5 properties of water. These are really the scaffolding or the basics of what we need to know about water. So go ahead and make this list, pause the video, and I will rejoin you in a moment. We're going to be looking at some things today that you've witnessed kind of naturally in your lives, but now I want to take a look at the scientific meaning behind what is actually happening. The first property of water we're going to look at is that it is a universal solvent, and it makes sense. If you take a sugar cube and you dump it into some water, it's going to dissolve. If you take some Kool-Aid powder and you dump it into water, that Kool-Aid powder is going to dissolve into the juice that you drink, right? So, but what is happening? Again, it goes back to hydrogen bonding and polarity.
Universal solvent, which means that many substances dissolve in it. Water's solvency has to do with the polarity and hydrogen bonding ability of water molecules. When a salt, such as sodium chloride, is placed in water, the negative ends of the water molecules are attracted to the positively charged sodium ions, and the positive ends of the water molecules are attracted to the negatively charged chloride ions. This attraction causes the sodium and chloride ions to break up or dissociate in water. Molecules allow chemical reactions to occur much more frequently.
So to make sure we're getting all that, let's put down in our notes here. So we're looking at our properties of water, My first property of water that I'm going to analyze is that it is the universal solvent. So exactly what does that mean, right? Well, it simply means that many other substances can dissolve in water. All right, many other substances, and in this case, we have an example of sodium, right? So you saw in the video where they dumped the salt into the water. So this whole thing right here, we say that this is one little salt cube, right? One little sprinkle of salt, and then you'll see how the water molecules are attracted to the sodium and to the chloride, right? So you're going to have the negative ends of the oxygen atoms, which are a part of the water molecules, attracted to the positive ends of the sodium. Same thing with the chloride. The positive ends of the hydrogens on the water molecules are going to be attracted to the negative ends of the chloride ions, okay? And that's going to start to pull them apart, again, making them making water what we call the universal solvent. Mostly all other polar molecules, things like sugar and things like sodium chloride, are able to dissolve in water. And that's really important because if you think about all of the nutrients that we need, those nutrients have to dissolve down into individual molecules so that they can cross over into the bloodstream and move from the bloodstream to tissue to help fuel the tissues of the body and the tissues of plants. So it's very important that water is considered the universal solvent for this reason. The next concept we're going to look at is cohesion and adhesion, okay, because water molecules have cohesive properties and they have adhesive properties. For each one of these properties of water, I want you guys to really focus on how do they help support life on Earth. So with the universal solvent property of water, we obviously have seen how water helps to dissolve essential nutrients that plants and animals need to survive, like glucose and phosphorus and nitrogen and things like that. In this case, we're looking at how water helps to move things through the body, through the bloodstream, for example, or through the xylem and the phloem of plants. That's one of the big reasons why I've paired up plants with this unit. So the big idea here for cohesion and adhesion is that water allows for the efficient transport of nutrients and waste through a living system. So where the universal solvent property again breaks those nutrients down, water through cohesion and adhesion is able to help move these things through the body. Let's take a look at the two principles here. The first one is the idea of cohesion. If you think about cohesion, you can think about like a group of people, maybe a team or a group of people that work together that are cohesive, right? That usually, so if it's a team, it might be like a soccer team. So we could say that everybody on the team is cohesive. They're all soccer players, so they're the same type of player. That's the same thing that we're looking at here when we look at cohesion, because we're looking at the same type of molecule. So we're seeing, for example, we have a water molecule here and a water molecule here and a water molecule here, all within the bloodstream. These water molecules are all working together to move through the blood. Cohesion then would be an attractive force between the same type of molecule. So between two water molecules, that is going to be cohesion, okay? Two of the same type of molecule working together, okay? And again, our big idea for the entire unit is hydrogen bonding, right? It is hydrogen bonding that makes this process possible. All right, so the hydrogen bonding actually really does cause the cohesion. There are hydrogen bonds between these water molecules that are holding them together. So that's the first property, is cohesion, which is the same type of molecule. Just like soccer players are the same type of player on a sports team, and if they have a cohesive team, they all work together. The second example would be adhesion. Adhesion, it would be like water in a blood vessel, like in our example here, but it is the attractive force between different molecule types. All right, so cohesion and adhesion are both going to be very important properties of water. All right, so again, we've got a red blood cell, which is one type of molecule. We've got a bunch of water molecules. Those water molecules are helping this red blood cell to move through the bloodstream, obviously, right? Which is very important because red blood cells carry oxygen, right? And those water molecules are also going to help carry things like nitrogen and all of those electrolytes that we spoke of before.
Molecules are also cohesive and adhesive. The hydrogen bonds in water cause water molecules to stick together, a property known as cohesion. Polar bonds also give molecules an adhesive property, or the ability to cling to other polar surfaces. Why is this important? Well, water fills the internal transport systems of plants and animals. Because of these cohesive and adhesive properties, water allows for the efficient transport of nutrients and waste within an organism. Water also has a high level of surface tension.
This is our third property of water, surface tension. And as you can see here, they've done a nice job of zooming in on the top layer of the water, okay, which forms what we call a meniscus there at the top. So let's go ahead and get that down in our notes that we have our third type here, which is going to be surface tension. We're going to call surface tension the attractive force, which is that going to be cohesion or adhesion at the top of the water when it's similar water molecules that are attracted to each other, right? That's going to be cohesion. All right. And then so if we have like a graduated cylinder and we have some water in our graduated cylinder, we're going to see cohesion and we're going to see adhesion because it's going to form at the top here what we call a meniscus. In this case, we're seeing cohesion, right, which is holding the water molecules together at the top, and then adhesion, which is causing the water molecules to actually be attracted to the surface of the glass or the plastic, whatever the graduated cylinder is made out of.
Are more strongly attracted to each other than to the air above. Water molecules cling tightly to each other. The surface tension of water explains why it beads up on waxy surfaces and why water-striding insects are able to walk on the surface of water.
So the next property of water is going to be its high capacity for heat, meaning that water can basically hold a ton of heat energy. And one of the reasons that is because it requires a bunch of energy to break those hydrogen bonds between the separate water molecules. Let's go ahead and dive into this a little more deeply. Make sure you're getting down good notes here on why water has a high heat capacity.
Water has a high capacity for heat. What this means is that the many hydrogen bonds that link water molecules